Hello everyone, and welcome to the very first day of the Anime Future 2016. And today we're taking a look at a classic known as Speed Racer, which was released in 1967, making this one of the very early animes. Now in case you haven't noticed, I usually like to start with a very early anime for at least for the first day. So I find starting off with one from the 60s is a good idea. So anyways, let's talk about the story for a bit. So the main character is named Speed Racer. Yeah, that's right, they decided to name him Speed Racer. Although in Japanese his name is Go Mifune. So I guess the family known as Racer finally decided to name their child Speed. Yeah, it's not the most creative thing ever, but whatever. It actually kinda makes it funny. So Speed Racer is a young boy who just loves racing. And he drives a very iconic car called the Mach 5, which is pretty much the equivalent of the Batmobile in this case. And then you have Sprite, who is Speed's younger brother, who always happens to carry around a chimpanzee named Chim Chim with him. They usually like to show up whenever on Speed's in danger. And then you have Pops, who is the father of Speed, and then he was also the creator of the Mach 5. And then there's Trixie, who is Speed's girlfriend. And surprisingly, she's not one of those types of characters who's always like helplessly being kidnapped all the time, which is actually quite different. And then there's Sparky, who is one of Speed's best friends. He's also a mechanic, so therefore you kind of expect him to start like upgrading the car or whatever. And then the last main character that I'll mention is named Racer X, but his real name is Rex Racer. Now I'm going to explain something, although some people might consider this to be a spoiler, but let's be real here, it doesn't really take a genius to figure this out. But Rex Racer is actually Speed Racer's older brother, but who ran away from home years ago. So that's pretty much all the main characters, and while the story isn't like the most complicated thing ever, it's actually pretty straightforward. It's just like most other animes that came out around this time, where just about every episode is self-proclaimed. Yeah, a lot of them are in like two different parts, but it's still telling the same story. But for the most part, it's generally just about like Speed Racer getting into a race and then a bunch of shit happens, and then he ends up fixing it somehow. It's usually how it works. It's just basic stuff that works fine. Also, one thing I have to note here is that this show is like unbelievably campy and corny, which is not always a bad thing, mind you. But man, let me tell you, the campiness of this one is just really fucking funny. Like just one example that I can remember that I found to be really funny is that one of the henchmen, and I believe it was in the second episode, he said, "I don't mind somebody's dust, but this is ridiculous." It's just too stupid that you just laugh at it anyway. But yeah, the plot in this show just isn't really like the greatest thing ever, but it still ends up being quite fun. And because this is a very early anime, you gotta take it for what it is. So overall, the story is pretty basic, but it does work fine, and it is fun. Now, as for the animation, I think it's not bad, although it does have one issue, and that is that the pacing is like really weird. It almost looks like everything is like sped up to look really fast. Now, I can understand them doing this with like the car scenes, but when it's a scene when like people are like walking around and nothing much is going on, it just looks really off. But I guess I can also make it look kinda funny too, but either way though, it's really a small complaint, but it is noticeable. But I will say that it is probably the weakest point in this entire show. And they also do reuse a lot of the same scenes too, but you know, I don't really think it's a really huge complaint. Considering around when this show came out, a lot of other shows done this, so it's pretty common that you've seen this. But either way, it's not too bad. Now as for the music, it's pretty fitting to the show, and some of the songs are pretty catchy, so I really don't have any complaints about that at all. And as for the opening, it was done by Danny Davis, who is a country singer, and well, country's not really my favorite thing to listen to, but there's a couple country songs I don't mind, and well, he's okay. But the fact that he's done the opening for this anime is actually kind of interesting. And it is very suiting to the anime, of course, and well, I think it's alright. It's not something I'd listen to very often, but you know, it's there. But I don't have any complaints about it whatsoever. And as for the voice acting, surprisingly, it's actually quite good. So some of the voices that you get here are Peter Fernandez, Corinne Orr, Jack Curtis, and Jack Grimes. And I believe most of these voice actors were originally radio announcers, so that is interesting to note. In fact, I found it to be pretty unique that they used something like this. And yeah, like I said, the whole entire show is pretty campy, and well, same with the voice acting too, but it's very suiting for that, and well, it's definitely not like it's unbearably awful or anything like that. It's pretty unique, and I kinda like it. It's definitely not like the most greatest voice acting I ever heard in my life, but it's definitely pretty interesting. So overall, not a whole lot of complaints, but it's definitely pretty interesting, like I've already said. Now, if I were to rate this anime, I'd have to give it an 8 out of 10. Now, some of you may be thinking that I'm being a bit generous here, but like I said before, you gotta take this show for what it is. And to be quite honest, I actually had a lot of fun watching this one. It was just good old campy shit that just amuses the hell out of me. What makes things even more strange is that there's not a lot of shows that are about racing that I've watched that actually held my interest. The only example of a show that was about racing that I actually liked as a kid was the Hanna-Barbera cartoon Wacky Races. And that show wasn't like my most favorite thing ever, but it was watchable and I still had fun with it as a kid. I'm pretty sure if I saw this show as a kid, I probably would have really liked it. Yeah, believe it or not, this is actually my first time ever watching this show. I mean, I was aware of it before, but I just never got around to watching it, until now. And like I already said, I found it to be really fun and enjoyable for what it is. So overall, I'd have to say that Speed Racer is definitely a classic. And I'd also like to say that not only is this show good to watch for out of curiosity, and is also quite funny, so at least you do get something out of it.